This material is part of our course Microeconomics. You can find more at professorpro.net. The current video belongs to Unit 1, Demand and Supply, and covers the class Changes in Equilibrium. The objective of this class is to address and answer the following questions. How will price and quantity of equilibrium change if there is a shift in demand or in supply? If one curve shifts, will the other one shift as well? And will markets move toward the new equilibrium? Let's start with the basics. Remember that the market equilibrium is the price and quantity at which there is no surplus and no shortage of production. A shift in demand or a shift in supply tends to change both the market price and quantity of equilibrium. Let's start by assuming that the market is currently in equilibrium. At the current price, quantity demanded and quantity supplied are equal. What would happen if, for example, the demand for orange juice increased? An increase in demand means that consumers wish to purchase more orange juice at the same price. If this were to occur, the market would not be in equilibrium anymore, because there would be more quantity demanded than quantity supplied. Remember that we call this a shortage of production. Producers can take advantage of this increased demand by raising their prices. Now more firms would want to sell orange juice because of its increased profitability. In turn, this brings quantity supplied equal to the new quantity demanded, meaning the market is again in equilibrium. Starting again from the initial market equilibrium, what would happen if the supply for orange juice increased instead? An increase in supply means that producers wish to sell more orange juice at the same price. Once again, the market would not be in equilibrium, this time because there would be more quantity supplied than quantity demanded. Remember that we call this a surplus of production. Consumers can take advantage of the competition between firms and buy from firms that lower their prices. Now, more consumers would want to buy orange juice at these lower prices. In turn, this brings quantity demanded equal to the new quantity supplied, which means the market is again in equilibrium. Now let's see how these concepts can be represented in graphs. Remember that the market equilibrium is where demand and supply intersect. At that price, quantity demanded and quantity supplied are equal. If there is, for example, an increase in demand for orange juice, quantity demanded will become higher than quantity supplied if the price stays the same. Market forces will push prices higher, which will lead to a movement along the supply curve. This continues until the market reaches the new equilibrium, where the shortage disappears. Note that both the price and quantity of equilibrium tend to increase with an increase in demand. The exact change in price and quantity depends on two factors. First, on how much the demand has changed, and second, on the slope of the supply curve. The inverse is true for a decrease in demand, where price and quantity of equilibrium tend to decrease. Note that this positive correlation between price and quantity of equilibrium is called the law of demand. There are exceptions to this rule, which will be covered later. In order to analyze changes in supply, let's go back to our initial equilibrium. If there is, for example, an increase in supply of orange juice, quantity supplied will become higher than quantity demanded if the price stays the same. Market forces will push prices lower, which will lead to a movement along the demand curve. This continues until the market reaches the new equilibrium, where the surplus disappears. Note that in this case, price of equilibrium tends to decrease, while quantity of equilibrium tends to increase. The exact change in price and quantity depends on two factors. First, on how much the supply has changed, and second, on the slope of the demand curve. The inverse is true for a decrease in supply, where price of equilibrium tends to increase and quantity of equilibrium tends to decrease. Note that this negative correlation between price and quantity of equilibrium is called the law of supply. There are exceptions to this rule, which will be covered later. To conclude, let's review the questions that this class set out to answer. In this class, we saw that, in the case of a shift in demand, price and quantity of equilibrium tend to move in the same direction. Higher price and quantity for increases in demand, and lower price and quantity for decreases in demand. In the case of a shift in supply, price and quantity of equilibrium tend to move in opposite directions. Lower price and higher quantity for increases in supply, higher price and lower quantity for decreases in supply. Ceteris paribus, a shift in one curve will not lead to a shift in the other curve, but to a movement along it. And finally, free and perfectly competitive markets tend to move toward the equilibrium if they are not already on it. If the equilibrium changes, market forces will push economic agents toward that new equilibrium. If you found this video helpful and want to see more, you can find the following examples. Thank you.